Hey everybody out there, and today for you guys we are going to be doing a deck profile of a deck that I have been putting together for the last year. Thankfully a lot of the cards nowadays have been reprinted, so they're very easy to get a hold of. But this deck holds a very special place in my heart as being what I consider one of the most powerful decks that I remember having to face off against in competitive Yu-Gi-Oh's history. Some people would call it not a tier 0 deck. I would call it a tier 0 deck for how dominant it was in its era, and that is Dragon Rulers. Like I said, some people don't consider it a tier 0 deck. I consider it one of the top 5 best decks ever made or created. You could even argue this was the first quote-unquote archetypal best deck in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! And I mean like a tier 0 best archetype deck ever in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Where it just dominated everything out the wazoo. Yes, you had Spellbooks. Yes, you had Evil Swarms. But Dragon Rulers won Nationals, even though Spellbooks was a very good deck with Judgment. This deck is based off Patrick Hoban's 2013 North America WCQ deck. I do not have his side deck built currently. That is something I am working on. But this deck I've been playing against other old school decks out there. If you guys are familiar with my channel, I have done other deck profiles in the past on 2004 Chaos, Dad Return, Teledad, and Goat Control, as well as some of the old school decks like Yugi's Pegasus, Joey, Kaiba, old starter decks. So I like profiling old school decks from time to time each year. And for this past year, this coming 2020, we are doing Dragon Rulers because, believe it or not, this coming year, guys, in 2020, when I'm recording this video, this deck will be now 8 years old come the WCQ this year. That blows my mind that this deck is that old, because I was in college when this deck was topping. And I remember how broken it was. I remember the day these cards were revealed online, and some people said, oh, it won't be a broken deck, and we quickly found out that wasn't the case. There was a certain Mega Capital G who said, oh, they won't be broken, and we quickly ate our words because we thought Harpies were going to be the broken deck at that time. We quickly found out we were mistaken. But yeah, I would say this is probably, Dragon Rulers back then were probably the best, archetypal deck. The first tier 0 archetypal deck next to Spellbooks, hand in hand, that were just out of this world broken, that were topping almost every major event. And so without further ado, let's get into this deck profile. Like I said, it is based off Patrick Hoban's 2013 WCQ deck. So, sorry for taking up the time. I just wanted to talk about my memories and history of this deck. So first, 3 Blaster, 2 Burner. You definitely run these ratios. Some people ran double Burner, I remember back in the day, because Burner back then, Blaster was considered probably the best Dragon Ruler for its ability to pop things. Me personally, I thought it was the best at that time. Big body, also the ability to pop things, discard things. You could also use it with Flame Veil, the Flame Veil card, to make, as a discarding fodder. If you remember, guys, the Flame Veil Guard Tuner, level 1. So it had a multitude of different abilities. So people ran different ratios, but they always ran 3 Blaster. That was a mainstay. And it's artistically, I love the fact that they made them all secret rare back then because they look just so beautiful. Next, 3 Redox, which is kind of your Monster Reborn for the deck, and 2 Dragon Rulers of Pebbles. Like I said, different people ran different ratios of the baby Dragon Rulers when they originally came out, the Dragon Rulers did, because people were running 3 of Pebbles, 3 of Burner, 3 of Tidal, 3 of what was the Lightning, I think it was. So people were running that, but then they quickly started cutting those down and just keeping the big boys in, because the big boys, Dragon Rulers, could go for synchro plays and level 7 exceeds plays. That's what they were mainly for Big Eye and Dragosack, as well as helping you go for your level 8 synchros. So that's why one of the reasons I actually always love this deck, because it could go for exceed and synchros, which are 2 of my original favorite mechanics, besides fusions and whatnot from back in the day. But yeah, definitely 3 Redox, 3 Pebbles. I love this deck, even though I hated it back then. It's so fun to go back and play against it, because I've played against people with Pepe, and I've played this deck against those decks, and it's just, they're like, oh my gosh, it's pretty broken. I'm like, yes it is! Full power Dragon Rulers. You flip up Vanity's Emptiness on a Pepe deck going first. They cry. they cry really hard, unless they have twin twisters. Next we got 3 Tempest and 2 Lightning. I did hollow these bad boys out to supers because they got reprinted recently as supers when Storm came back, when Tempest came back recently off the ban list. Now, at this current moment in time, we don't have any of the other Dragon Rulers off the ban list. Tempest is the only Dragon Ruler we currently have back. In the future, maybe we'll get more of them. It has been 8 years. I think it's been 5 years since they've been banned. 5 or 6 years that they've been banned by now. All the Dragon Rulers. So maybe it's time to let them out of the prison. I don't know. But 3 Lightning. Some people consider Storm the, I would say, the less broken of all the other Dragon Rulers compared to Tidal, Blaster, and Redox. Which is the reason I think it recently came back. But that's what people consider it to be. But 3 Tempest and 3 Lightning. Double Lightning, excuse me. Next up we got our 3 Tidal. So 3 Tidal. 3 stream, double stream. I would love for Tidal to come back. I love this card. Such a good card. Especially in Mermills back when I was playing this back in the day. But yeah, this is the ratio for this guy. It's pretty straightforward. Love the artwork. He's like one of my favorite artworks as well, Tidal is. But yeah, that's all for the Dragon Rulers. I just want to gut through that because that's pretty straightforward if you remember playing this deck. And the funny thing about Dragon Rulers, which I'm going to mention to you guys because a lot of people forget about this from back in the day, is that you could always tell by the way you used your resources the difference between a good Dragon Ruler player and a bad Dragon Ruler player, because a good Dragon Ruler player would work for, he would grow, I want to say, he would conserve his resources and not just go all in. This was something I noticed back in the day, was talked about back in the day, and I've talked to some older players and they remember, yeah, that was a case back then, and I've had them play this deck like newer school players, and they're just go all out, blow their load, so to speak, and lose. But if you play it right, if you use your cards right, and you were conservative a little bit, and you actually knew how to use your resources and use your graveyard efficiently as a second hand, you will always succeed, if I found. But you could always tell that even back then. The difference between somebody that had a mastery of the deck and someone who was just a novice at the deck, even though it was a very powerful deck. But yes, next up we have something we have not seen in quite some time currently in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! And that is Max C at 3 of. Hey, remember we have Ash Blossom and Joyous Springs and all the hand trap girls? Well, back then we had 3 Max C and 3 Effect Failure. Hand traps have been a thing a lot longer in the game than you thought of, right? Yes. So maxing out on hand traps back then are pretty, you know, people used to do that even back then, guys. And Flamboyant Guard was a nice little tuner that worked with Blaster and also could be used for level 1, using the level 7 dragons, the big boys, with the level 1 tuner to help go into synchro plays. Also, people sometimes would normal summon the Effect Failure if they wanted to go into Ancient Sacred Wyvern to help go for that play. So, depending upon the situation, you would use this as a tuner, and this is a tuner, and then Max C is Max C. Like, I don't know what else to say about that. Let's continue onwards, guys. I'm having fun going down memory lane with this deck. Another card that just recently came off the list, I think a couple months ago, and that is Super Rejuvenation. It's not as broken. I mean, Super Rejuvenation, remember, guys, was in this game for years. And nobody really used it that much until Dragon Rulers came and made it broken. And even now that it's back at 3 some people try to use it in certain decks, but it is nowhere as near as powerful as it was with Dragon Rulers at all, I find. And yeah, it's just interesting to have this card back at 3F because in this deck it is broken, in other decks it's not as good, I find. But Super Rejuven back at 3F is a kind of a weird thing. But yeah, it's one of those cards that it feels like it was made specifically for Dragon Rulers, even though it was made years and years and years before Dragon Rulers even came out. Broken draw card. You could draw so many cards off Super Rejuvenation. And then Konami thought, hey, you know, Super Rejuven's been out, but we need to give them their own little draw card. So they came up with this card in the same set as they did Dragon Rulers. Sacred Sword of the Seven Stars. I believe this originally came out in Lord of the Tachyon Galaxy along with the Dragon Rulers. It could have come out like a set before or so, but I'm pretty sure it did. It really felt like they were like, here, Dragon Rulers, just have more draw power just in case you clunk your hand. Yep, more draw power for the deck. Just stupid draw power. Oh yeah, Gold Sark. Now, there's some interesting things that if you look at Patrick Hoban's build compared to other people's builds out there, he wanted to keep it a 40-card deck, and some people were running 41, 42. Gold Sark was at 3 of at this time, and he was only running 2 of it, which is interesting. But he felt the need that he would rather cut it down to 2 of, and also run Vanity's Emptiness. That way he could draw into the Vanity's Emptiness, set up his board, flip the Vanity's Emptiness, GG to your opponent. And then depending upon the matchup, he would switch out the Vanity's Emptiness. I think that's what he was talking about in one of his deck profiles from years ago I remember watching. Next up we have Heavy Storm, Book of Moon, Card Destruction. Back then, Card Destruction was legal. Heavy Storm was legal, but there's 2 other cards that were legal that you'll notice that he didn't run in here, which was considered the Holy Trinity. Heavy Storm, Monster Reborn, and Dark Hole. Back then, that was considered the Holy Trinity of Yu-Gi-Oh! Heavy Storm, Monster Reborn, and Dark Hole. He didn't run Monster Reborn, and he didn't run Dark Hole. The reason for this is you have to just know the game, where the game was at this time, and how quickly it had evolved, to the point where Dark Hole was just not as good of a card. It was a good card still, but the game was so fast-paced, and the boards you were creating were so, I don't want to say powerful, like it just was useless to have Dark Hole. Like it wasn't, it could get bricky, is what I remember people referring it to. And Monster Reborn, you didn't really need Monster Reborn because you already had Monster Reborn-esque cards in the deck. So they took setup to be used properly and were considered slower. Interesting. But that's what I remember people discussing back then. That's not what I'm saying. That's what people were saying back then to my memory. And when I was doing research on this deck, that's what I find out too. But Heavy Storm was considered broken because you wanted to get rid of people's back rows, especially if they had Spellbook. You know, if you're going second and they have Spellbook of Fate, well, you kind of want to get rid of Spellbook of Fate if you're playing against Spellbook deck. So, yep. And then Card Destruction makes sense. And then next you see 2 Vanity's Emptiness. He did run a 3rd in the side deck, though. I want to mention that he did run a 3rd Vanity's Emptiness in the side deck. But Vanity's Emptiness, it's broken. It's pretty much Royal Oppression for back then. If you guys used to play back when this card was even at 1 of, you remember how broken this card was. It was ridiculously broken. Next, we have the extra deck. We have Dragonite because, hey, it's Dragon Rulers. He's my favorite Pokemon. Go Dragonite. Triple Dragosack. Double Big Eye. He only ran Double Big Eye. And if you guys remember back then, this card was like 200, I think 150 to 200 bucks. This card shot up to like 100 bucks initially. And there was something back then called the Big Eye Wars. You may say, what the heck's the Big Eye Wars? Well, Big Eye Wars kind of went something like this. You have a Dragosack on the field, right? Cool. I go Big Eye. I steal your Dragosack. Then you go Big Eye, and then you steal my Big Eye. And then I make another Big Eye, and then I steal your Big Eye. There were boards, I remember back then, of four Big Eyes on the board. Because it was called the Big Eye Wars. You would just steal monsters back and forth. It was ridiculous. And Big Eye was really broken back then. So there was something back then, if you guys remember, called the Big Eye Wars. Then we have Abyss Gaios, which has just recently gone up in price, but it's a broken card. Even a good card even today. Gaia Thought, the Thunder Charger, still a good card. Gymnite Pearl. Some people ran Maestroke, which Maestroke back then, if you guys remember, the Symphony Daijin, was pretty good back then. But the reason he ran Gymnite Pearl was he said it would help get over Ophion, plus it was an Earth attribute, and it would work with Redox. That's what he said, not me. Next we have Armory Arm, Ancient Sacred Wyvern, which you would make with Effect Veiler, Black Rose Dragon for blowing up the board, just in case. Thought Ruler Archfiend, which was pretty a good card. Scrap Dragon Help was just amazing back in those days even. Colossal Fighter. When was the last time you saw this card being played? Crimson Blader, which was pretty much the one. This is actually a Jack Atlas card, I think. I remember from like one of the episodes in the anime. But some people ran 2 of this card back then, but it was a really powerful card, especially against the Dragon Ruler matchup and the mirror match against Dragon Rulers, and also against Spellbooks because of, Priestess. And then lastly, I ran 2 tokens. I have another Dragosoak token, but we have one Dragosack token over here, which is kind of cool. I have other ones, but I'm just using one because I also wanted to play my YCS token over here because this is a YCS deck profile from Nationals back then. So that's why I decided to run a YCS token instead. Well, I hope you guys all enjoyed this memory down memory lane. I want to talk about the history of this deck, give the ability for people to find a understanding of how players' mindsets were back then when playing, and also at the same time be able to understand the history of this deck and the history of the game at that time. When we look back on it currently, 8 years ago, you'll notice that this game is just as fast as it was back then to some degree. There are powerful decks out there. Powerful decks come and go all the time in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! But some of them must be remembered because of how broken and how powerful they were for their time frame. And this is one of those decks. You could also throw Spellbooks in the mix as well. If you guys want to, maybe I can put together a Spellbook deck for you guys. That'd be awesome. But yeah, this deck came out, it's hard to imagine, so many years ago. Hope you guys all enjoyed this deck profile. Hope you guys all enjoyed this trip down memory lane as well. And until next time, take care, have fun dueling, good luck dueling to all of you. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel. I'll see all of you guys next time. Take care, everybody.